Is there a way the Chicago White Sox could actually exceed expectations this season? Let's discuss how anything is possible considering expectations are so low anyways on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert of SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network. And also, I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And also follow or subscribe to the show at wherever you get your podcasts. Well, sportsbooks have set the over-under on the Sox win total somewhere between 49.5 and 51.5. Zips has the Sox winning 61 games at the most, and let's discuss if it's possible for the Sox to do the unthinkable and not lose 100 games. Then let's look into some overlooked players the White Sox will need to perform well in order to at least meet expectations. And finally, the White Sox have an interesting home scheduling quirk that I think is a good idea. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting, and right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Okay, so I don't want to peddle false hope here. I don't want to, blow some air up your you-know-what in terms of like saying, hey, the White Sox are going to exceed expectations. They're going to lose only 90 games. And even think about it. The expectation is hopefully maybe a 20-game improvement, and that's still an 100-loss season for the third year in a row. But one reason I'm tackling this subject is after talking about the recent passing of former manager Jeff Torborg on yesterday's show, it got me thinking overachieving is always possible. Now, I doubt it's going to be going from the 41 wins last year to 90 wins, say, kind of like the turnaround that Torborg had from 89 to 90. Obviously, it wasn't 41 wins. It was more in the 60 win range, but it was still a huge, huge leap. And don't get me wrong, I love Will Venable taking over as manager, but I don't think he's going to have that kind of effect where you're just going to just make this huge, huge leap, especially in the first season, because that just didn't happen in Jeff Torborg's first season if you're going to use the historical correlation. But hey, maybe there's a chance that Venable can push the right buttons, and there's maybe enough overachieving to beat the odds and the projections. And the Zips projections of 61 wins actually surprised me a bit. I get that it's based a lot on happenstance, on the law of averages, and just everything balancing out. But just mathematical reasoning alone believes the crazy way variance went against the White Sox last season should not happen. And the White Sox were a terrible team. Don't get me wrong in 2024, but Murphy's Law going to the extreme is what helped them to get over the 120-loss finish line. But still, after living through that 2024 season and just seeing prudent, modest upgrades, I do fear that there's a chance that not even math or logic can help the White Sox avoid another historically awful season. I'm still going to put that somewhat in the area of expectations that, yes, we should hope for a 20-win bounce, that we should hope that these prudent, modest offseason additions should at least get the White Sox back to a, as they say, factory settings baseball team. But then again, I mean, it's not like they upgraded their talent so much to where you can't say they're any better than they were last year. I mean, modest improvements, yes, but you get a bunch of injuries, you get another year of underperformance and fallback performances and regression. There is the possibility that they could still flirt with the one record that they didn't break, and that was the 1916 Philadelphia A's worst winning percentage. And also, again, Garrett Crochet's not here. But, at least you're starting to see, in my opinion, a better constructed roster than 2024. That roster being constructed in the first place is what set the team up for having that shot at, finishing with the worst record of all time. I mean, it was a poorly constructed roster in 2024. Run prevention was the focus, and getting Pedro Grifol, his fast guys, his grinder guys, is definitely what put the Sox on the path to have a shot way beyond 100 losses. Honestly, looking back at it, hindsight 2020, being 2020, there was no way that was going to give the Sox a shot at even just 90 losses and improving from 2023. It was just poor roster construction. This year, at least in the generalities of how the roster has been constructed, at least you have an emphasis of getting on base to get more attempts to score runs. get solid starting pitching like you did last season, because remember, that was the only thing that went well. Now, yes, you don't have Garrett Crochet anymore, but you still have at least the potential for a very solid starting rotation. And then you're trying for as many bounce back seasons from veteran relievers to avoid blowing so many leads, and then backfilling them with your promising young arms once you flip all those relievers at the deadline, provided they have the bounce back seasons. Although defensively, at least, the infield is going to definitely be a huge question mark. But hey, if the ball at least gets hit in the air to center or right and stays in the park, you got a good chance of it being caught with Luis Robert Jr. if he's on the opening day roster and still healthy. Even then, you still got Mike Tauchman and Austin Slater to catch it. You know, they feel the ball, they feel their position rather well. You're obviously still going to have to worry about Andrew Benintendi's arm, although just convince him, as long as it's not the game-winning run at third, just throw it to the cutoff man. And there was a couple of leads that the White Sox blew or ties, that happened because Andrew Benintendi with his loft, because that's all he can do. I mean, yeah, he can get the ball to home plate, but he's going to loft it. He can't gun it. It's going to have so much time that, guys can run. And how many times did he loft it to home plate? And then now that the hitter then would get himself into scoring position. A lot, especially, well, not, or if anybody was on base, I meant. And that usually did happen. I saw it a few times where, a guy hits a sacrifice fly, Benintendi would try to float it. Another guy, if it was on base, would tag up, get in a scoring position, and then you'd have even worse problems. And obviously the lack of pop is also a huge issue, because even if you get all these guys on base, it's kind of hard to get them home. And you got to be still able to drive them in, and you'd still like to have instant offense. So 61 wins obviously would be great, but how about the Sox actually beating the projections and, dare I say, avoid losing 100 games? Should you and I dare to dream? Well, if it's going to happen right away, I'm just saying this, don't rely on the few veterans on this team. It's honestly, you don't want the few veterans on this team after the trade deadline. You want them gone. So obviously, yes, you would like to have, Luis Robert Jr. and Andrew Vaughn and, the relievers that I'm going to mention in a little bit, and, Martin Perez helping you out as well. But obviously, you want them gone. You want to flip them for assets. The only veteran that you should accept staying after the deadline is Benintendi, and that's because the contract demands it. I mean, unless he's absolutely raking, I doubt they're going to be able to offload his contract yet. But otherwise, as I've discussed in a bunch of episodes, to, point, why does Luis Robert Jr. have to be traded? Go back to a bunch of episodes where I've talked about it. Andrew Vaughn, he only has 1 year left of club control. And if he shows anything above the replacement level, cash in on the asset status then. Cash in. Okay? Stop hoping that there's going to be something there long term. Cash in on it. Mike Tauchman, Josh Rojas, and Austin Slater, they can all do things for a contender off the bench that should fetch at least a prospect with a legit shot to be a big league bullpen arm. And remember, cheap, effective bullpen arms is what you want the White Sox to have going forward, because you and I know we're in this hex situation anyway because of the last competitive window, spending way too much money on the bullpen and not enough on second base and right field. I will repeat that till I see the next winning team. Okay? That's a hill I'm going to die on. And on the next winning team, if that ever happens, I want to see the bullpen outside of maybe a closer. There's nothing wrong with spending on a closer. But, your setup men, all that stuff, use the draft, develop those arms, use their cheap salaries so you can use the limited financial resources that the owner will eventually give you to plug holes you really need. But what you want is the guys. So again, you want those guys, and basically any veteran that shows any value, you want them to get the heck up out of here. Obviously, veteran with more than a season of experience. Obviously, you're not trading Jonathan Cannon. Davis Martin, I still wouldn't want to trade, that type of stuff. But if they're playing to max value, you could at least have a shot of, and that's the other thing, if they're playing to max value or even mid, somewhere in between, just as long as they're not like Nicky Lopez or Chris Flexen, where it's like there's no way you can trade these guys because they're not providing you much of value, you have a shot at least of a better first half than 2024. But really, if the Sox are going to need to exceed expectations, it's the young players expected to make the big league club out of spring training or debuting during the season that need to make a meaningful impact. Now, obviously, they don't need to hit the ground completely running, but you do want them to be showing that they can minimize rookie slumps, and show that they could even be rookie of the year candidates or at least viable foundational players with the arrow pointing up. That's why it's important for Colson Montgomery and Kyle Teal and Edgar Carroll to have at least solid to rookie of the year seasons, even then to, exceed the expectations. Because again, they're likely going to be here the majority of the season, whether they start in April, or late March, but whether they start the season on the 26-man roster or they're eventually promoted, they will be here after the deadline. You also need Chase Mydroth, for example, to get on base regularly. Brian Ramos, he's got to take a step forward. Miguel Vargas, even hitting 220 would help. Lenyn Sosa, even showing his strong September was no fluke, would go a long way to exceeding expectations. And obviously the starting rotation cannot have a regression or take a step back, cannot have a regression. You need Jonathan Cannon, Davis Martin, Drew Thorpe, and Sean Burke, as those are the four that I'm hoping join Martin Perez in the rotation to keep moving forward, to show that they are very good, reliable starting rotation arms. With Burke and Thorpe, they've actually got the potential and the stuff to be aces. Maybe you do get a bump if Hagen Smith and Noah Schultz somehow come to the big leagues, although it's reading more and more that they're probably going to spend the whole year in the minor leagues, although never underestimate the Sox wanting to have that, here's the big league debut gate, jump, that type of stuff. But then finally, you need the bullpen to not regularly blow leads like they did in 2024 and to exceed, because remember, that bullpen blew 37 saves. Last time I checked, 41 plus 37 is 78. So think about that. Now, obviously, you're going to still have blown saves, but try to keep it as minimal as possible. And maybe you have a shot at avoiding 100 losses. But the other way that you're going to avoid 100 losses, you just got to look at the run differential. I mean, it's the simple money ball bet. You got to score this amount of runs. You can't allow this amount of runs to hit whatever win projection you're looking for. And to avoid 100 losses, really the run differential, if you're looking at the trends, it has to be under minus 200. Going back to 2022, 9 times the team lost 90 games. So, you only had basically, and it was a consistent group. Like the Angels were part of that, all 3 years. So that's why I said 9 times. It's not 9 teams, it's 9 times. And the 2022 Royals and Rockies, they had the highest run differential of those teams to lose in the 90 to 99 range. And that was at minus 170 and minus 175. That's why I mentioned the Royals, because the Rockies run differential of 175 is always Coors Field aided. But the Tigers proved too, you don't even have to score 600 runs to be a 90 loss team. In 2022, they scored 557 runs, but their run differential was minus 156. Even a 52 run improvement from 2024 should yield at least beating the under projection of 49 to 51 games, wins, considering the 2023 A's scored 585 runs on their way to winning 50 games. And why they finished with 112 losses compared to the 2022 Tigers that finished with more than 90 losses can be attributed to the run differential. The 2023 A's had a minus 339 run differential. So if you're seeing that again, where the the Tigers had it minus 156. So that's another big thing that's going to happen to exceed expectations. Remember, the Sox had a minus 306 in 2024, but again, they only scored 505 runs. So you got to score more runs. And even if the struggle to score runs still happens with the lack of instant offense and all that, improving and just cutting down that margin that they had down, and especially if they can get it under 200, then yeah, you've got a chance to even really exceed expectations and win 25 to 30 games, depending on that. But also you got to score runs, got to have talent, that type of stuff. So even if the Sox just hit 50 to 60, the 50 to 61 wins mark, let's look into some players that normally do not get brought up, but they got to have a solid season. And let's talk about that next on Locked On White Sox. Ever sign up for that free trial and then forget to cancel before the billing on the subscription kicks in? I know I have. And then next thing you know, my wife and I were doing the budget. We're looking at our credit card statements or the bank account. And we're like, why are a couple extra bucks keep getting drained out? Every dollar counts in today's economy, and I recommend Rocket Money to help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you're paying for twice. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances, and Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals that you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. Find it hard to keep track of, do you still need this subscription, or are you using a certain streaming service like me? Then use Rocket Money because it can help make go through those budget sucking items a lot more effective than I can. And I'm all for effective, and hopefully so are you. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms. So make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. All right, so I spoke about the run differential in the previous segment, and one way the Sox can just avoid flirting with any chance of losing more than 110 games is having a better bullpen. Again, 37 blown saves last year. 56 blown leads, with most of it coming from the bullpen. Now, the plan on paper is rely on veterans, having bounce-back seasons, and then dealing them at the deadline. I'm talking about Steven Wilson, Bryce Wilson, if he doesn't earn a rotation spot, and I really prefer Bryce Wilson to be in the bullpen because it's just his numbers are always better in the bullpen. Penn Murphy, Ron Marinaccio. Yeah, I think I spelled it and pronounced that right. Talking about Tyler Gilbert, Justin Anderson, Cam Boozer, maybe to a certain extent, just Jared Shuster. I don't know. Again, he's been with you now a full year. He did pitch a little bit for the Braves, so maybe his club control clock is something that if he has a good season, maybe you want to leverage him, especially since you do have plenty of lefties to replace him in the bullpen that could still be effective. But as you and I saw last year, grabbing relievers off the scrap heap doesn't always work out because some of those guys are just no longer on the upswing. They're not the viable stocks anymore. They're just bad. They're just terrible. They're Brian Shaw. They're just done. They're cooked. Again, I'm not totally upset that they tried Dominic Leone. He just was bad. Tim Hill, bad. Although I don't think they really grabbed him off the scrap heap. He was really supposed to make a difference. And my hypothesis is he was the guy that walked on that Airbus plane and was like, what is this? This is so mid, that type of stuff. But it does mean that the Sox will have to rely on some of the younger guys in their system or on the 40-man roster at some point this season, especially after the trade deadline. If everything goes according to plan and you can flip some of these veterans, you're going to have to backfill them. And that's why it's imperative that these bullpen arms have productive seasons if they're here all year or they come up at some point. I'm talking about Gus Varland, who showed some promise when he joined the team late in 2024. Actually became a viable option as a high leverage reliever last season. And I think he could be one of those guys again. And again, he was a very buy low he's a very buy low option. He's been cut by a couple teams. He was a former Rule 5 draft failure. So, that's a guy that you would like to see continue what he was doing well at the end of the 2024 season. Jake Eder, or Eder, depending on how you like to pronounce it. I think he still should not be forgotten as a piece that they can use in in their a pitching piece. I know he's definitely been forgotten. I know I keep forgetting about him. He's no longer in their top 30 prospects. And at one point, I think he was in their top 10. I mean, he's completely tumbled out, and he hasn't graduated from prospects status. At least I don't think so. He only pitched in one big league game. But he is 26, and he's been very inconsistent in the minors. And honestly, he's been passed by other talented arms. You have other options now. But, anytime I did turn on Barron's games and saw him pitch, and every day heard me talk, I mean, I preferred to watch Barron's games last year than the actual White Sox games. I still say, he's a lefty with some good stuff. Obviously just struggles with his command sometimes, but still has some decent pitches. Enough to where I would say, let's get him to focus now on just get 3 outs. Or if we have to end the inning, if we get the matchup where we need the lefty, get that out. It still makes sense to maximize, some of the very good pitches he can throw. It's not like you should just totally trash him away. It's the same thing with Nick Nashvini. If he can't figure out being a starter, consistently through the second time in the order and keeping his command, try him out as a reliever. Although, more his stuff is more conducive to a starter because, again, it's not like he's going to be throwing a ton of heat. I think Jake can reach high 90s or mid 90s, if I'm correct. Like, he still has the stuff that would translate well as a bullpen arm. And plus, if you're dealing Boozer and Gilbert at some point, also, side note, you don't have to even trade either one of those guys because they're under club control. The issue is they're both in their 30s. You're going to need some lefties to replace them in the pen. That's why Fraser Ellard is another guy that needs to have a productive season whenever he comes up to the big league club. I think he's probably going to start the year in Charlotte again. I know he showed some promise when he got some big league innings, but he's got minor league options. So that is why, and again, I'm okay with this. Let's try to get some veterans off the scrap heap, see if we can revive their career. In Brian Bannister, we trust. And then let's flip them for assets at the trade deadline because, again, the 2024 trade deadline was so good to bullpen arms. So I've got no problem with that. What I don't want is a long leash for veterans if they're struggling, where I don't want these veterans on the team after the deadline because that would get in the way of seeing if Fraser Ellard can be a long-term bullpen arm. But you still have time. You still have minor league options with Ellard. But at some point, he's probably going to be up here, up. And the expectation would be you're not going back. Be productive. Be a solid left-handed reliever. Jordan Leisure also has to return to the early season promise that he showed. He was showing that he could be a long-term high-leverage setup man, even a closer, but then he just fell apart. And he had some injuries, but he's got to regain that form. Again, he's probably going to be somebody that you want to look more viable later in the season when you have to backfill. But that's going to be what the White Sox need. A lot of their pitching depth that they have as prospects or young pitchers probably going to need to backfill any of these veteran relievers that hopefully are effective and then they get dealt, or you're replacing them just if they're ineffective. Jared Shuster, probably want to see more consistency out of him too. But I think if the White Sox are even going to meet or exceed expectations, it's still going to come down to the bullpen dictating that. Well, the Sox are doing something that I think is actually rather neat with the start times of their evening weekday home games that I want to discuss next on Locked On White Sox. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes NFL playoffs even more exciting. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going, man. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. I always maintain FanDuel's money lines, spreads, and over-unders. They're fun to play. But if you want to win big, FanDuel's parlays, props, and futures are the way to go. And whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, or wherever they get their podcasts, as this show is available on all major podcast platforms. And also feel free to leave a 5-star review. Would love to get that rating up from 4.5. Let's get it to 4.6, 4.7. Let's keep growing the YouTube community. I believe we're at 2,200 plus subscribers. Love to get to 2,300. Let's keep adding. Let's build it up, and let's keep talking some White Sox baseball, even though it's obviously hasn't been great for the last couple of seasons. But hey, for those that say I'm too negative, and even one of my bad reviews, because you get those haters out there, talking positive, today, this show has been nothing but sunshine and rainbows. If you check out the White Sox schedule this season, you'll notice the start time for weekday evening home games is actually 6:40 p.m. for the entire season. Not sure why. Shout out to @SoxNerd on Twitter for noticing this. I've not been able to find any official reason on why the White Sox are doing this. Alyssa Bergamini is probably the closest White Sox official, the pregame, the in-game host at Rate Field, and she just said RIP to 7:10 starts. At least it's better than Remember the 7-Eleven promotion that they had where all the starts were at 7-Eleven? But again, no official reason that I can find. And again, I'm talking about the whole entire season because usually earlier start times for night games in April and May and September is nothing new, as teams do that to still entice families to come out during school nights. Usually you start, they'll have even the 6:10 or the 6:40 start time during the week in April and May and September to accommodate school, to make sure that the game can, and especially with the pitch clock now, you could probably get a game done. If you started a game at 6:40, you're hopefully going to have that game done by 8:40, 9:15. And then depending on where you're coming from, hopefully you're back home by 10 o'clock. Maybe the kiddos only get 8 hours of sleep. Again, it's how you parent, it's all that stuff. But, that's usually during school. But the White Sox are going to do this June, July, and August. And even the Cubs, they're going to 7:05 starts in the summer. Boston, I think, is going to 7:10 starts, Eastern time. Brewers drink. I saw that they're actually doing 6:40 Monday through Thursday if it's not a getaway game, but they're still doing 7:10 on Friday. Honestly, though, not a bad idea for the White Sox to start every game at 6:40 if it's a home game. Especially again, pitch clock, you can realistically still sell, bring your family to the ballpark and get out at a reasonable time now. Because that's my only thing that I'm thinking is it's TV, but it's not. They own CHSN. They can run it at any time. So my only theory is this is to try to draw still families to come out to the ballpark. And again, there's nothing wrong with taking in a game, even though the White Sox, again, are not going to probably produce many wins. You can still see other team stars and you can still have fun memories, so, but also in terms of getting out a reasonable time and then getting home, it all depends on where you're coming from. And also what is your disposable income? I'm fully aware of all that. Also, though, the reason why I think it's a great idea is, yes, I'm selfishly loving this as, how I operate the show, give you a little bit behind the curtain. I'm usually getting sleep. I was getting sleep deprived during the season as if the game wrapped up around, 9:40, 10, 10:30, I was getting up I was either staying up then to continue to record and then I have to get up for my 9 to 5, or I was getting 6-7 hours of sleep, getting up at maybe 4 or 5 in the morning to, do all my prep and record, that type of stuff. So I'm fine with the earlier start time, but I'm honestly actually also impressed I'm surprised that the Sox are doing this because this may cut down on how many folks get to the ballpark sooner and maybe mill around once gates open. Now, obviously, if you like tailgating, this might not be very good for you, especially if you get off work at 5. And then you got to, especially if you're in the Chicago downtown area, you got to get through the loop. You still, if it was a 7:10 start, you still had 2 hours to get to the park, either from the L or Uber or again, battling traffic. Now you've lost a half hour there. But then again, it's only an issue if you're coming from the north, having to travel south and driving that can always be a pain if you have to get through the loop. But again, the hack, just try to get off at one of the, once the traffic backs up, as long as, especially if you're on 94 coming on the Edens, I've always done that hack where, and I learned it from my old man, you just get off as, close to the north and try to get to Ashland and then just, just drive on in. Got to deal with the stoplights, obviously. But that was a hack my old man always did. But still, Jerry's cutting off a half hour of extra. You being able to mill around the concessions, he's cutting that off. So could be a bad thing if you like to have, again, a bit more time to get to the ballpark, depending on your schedule. Or the other theory that I can just think of, or a hypothesis, and if somebody has it, feel free to put it in the comments. I'll read it later or email me. Maybe the Sox just figure out most of the folks that are going to be coming out on a weeknight, they're the diehards, or they live in Bridgeport. So let's just get them out with enough time to get a good night's rest. I don't know. But selfishly, I do love it. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. I'll be back tomorrow to discuss some what-if situations regarding drafting someone else other than Andrew Vaughn or Nick Madrigal. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding how the Sox can exceed expectations, who else has to step up to at least meet expectations, and the Sox' interesting home weekday start times. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dubber, at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day. Hopefully you're staying warm. See you tomorrow.